Hey guys, welcome to Programming Knowledge. From this video onwards, we will be looking at functions in C++. So till now we have been using only one function, right? That is this particular main function. Whatever we have been writing inside this function and then we have been executing it. So from now onwards, we will be understanding how to work with multiple such functions and how they make your program much more efficient and readable. So first things first, what is a function? So if you remember your basic math classes, you have come across something like y equal to sine x or y equal to x cube, x square. So all these things are functions, right? So if you look at the mathematical definition of a function, what it says is it will take in a set of numbers and then it will map every element in that set with exactly one element in the other set. So if that is confusing, what it basically means is it can take n number of things inside this definition. That is, if I'm defining a function as y equal to some f, so inside this I can take as many elements as possible, but the y is going to be only one value. So it can only compute something, it can work on the mathematical operations, and then it will give you exactly one single output for y. So if you look over here, so y equal to sine x, there is a series of sine x, right? So it will be something like 1 minus 1 factorial, something like that. So that computation is done on this particular x, and then that only one value which is in the range of -1 to 1, right? So -1 to 1 inclusive, that particular value is returned to y. So if you take an x square, it is going to take some number x and then it is going to do some computation, that is it's going to multiply itself and then it will return back you y. So this is again only a single number. So again, if you take the equation of a line, let's say y equal to mx plus c, where m is the slope. So here again I can define y in 2 or 3 different ways also. So one first way is, let me write it down here. First way is that it is going to take only one input, that is y equal to f of x. So where let's say f of x is going to return mx plus c. And the other way is you can say y equal to f of, let's say, g of m comma x, where it's going to take in the value of m and x, where c is already defined inside the function, and it's going to return you mx plus c, right? The other way is y equal to h of, let's say, m comma x comma c. I'm going to take all the values and I'm just going to compute that. So that is where sorry, over here it is g of x, and h of this particular, sorry, this is m comma x, h of m comma x comma c is going to be mx plus c. So don't worry if it is really mathematical. What I'm trying to say is it can take multiple inputs, but it is going to give you exactly one output. So in this case, it's going to give you exactly one number, right? That is the y coordinate of this particular line. If you're given the x coordinate, it's going to give you the y coordinate, or vice versa. You can define it the other way too. So that is exactly how functions work in programming also. So let me write it down here. In programming, a function can take multiple inputs, but it can give you only one single output. Inputs is basically, it could be 0 as well as n number of inputs. You can either give it something or it can perform independently also. That will depend upon the function you are writing. So enough of the definition of the function. Now let us look at why do we need functions. So here I have a basic program. We don't need this. I'm just going to delete this. And here we have a basic program to add two numbers, right? So what if I say that I want to ask the user for, adding these two numbers, let's say some 10 times. At first you would say you need to copy and paste this thing 10 times. Now, as you are well versed with loops, what you are going to do is you will be putting these things inside the loop. But if you look at this is about, let's say it's a 9-liner code, right? So if you make a loop, the loop's body will contain 9 lines of code. So let's just imagine it's not such a simple program of adding two numbers. It's something more than that. And what if you are going to solve a particular problem which contains, let's say, 100 lines of code? So if you're giving that code to me, I won't understand what you're doing, right? So at a first glance, I won't understand what you're doing. And then I need to spend some time, and then I need to understand everything. I need to understand how you're using the variables and all, and then I will be able to develop on that. And the second thing is you will be writing a lot of redundant code. Let me put this inside a loop and explain you. So let's say I is less than 10 and I plus plus, and this is a loop body, right? So it starts from here and ends over here. So here these things are getting reinitialized again and again and again, highly inefficient, and then this particular computation is going on. So basically this looks clumsy and it decreases the readability, and then it will drastically increase the redundancy of the code. So by using functions, what you will be doing is you will be asking these 10 lines to be executed in a separate kind of environment, where once the job is done, you will return back to this particular environment. So it's not exactly an environment, but it's actually switching your control to some other thing, right? So it's like working in a team. So instead of doing everything by yourself, you will ask your team member to do something else for you, right? So that is how you use functions over here. So let's now talk about how to work with functions, how to define functions in C++. So in this video, we'll be just looking at one definition of a function. In the subsequent videos, we'll be exploring more on these things. So a very basic implementation of function is that it won't take any inputs and then it won't give any outputs, right? So that is a very basic implementation of function. So how you represent number of inputs and number of outputs and how you define a function is in this way. So first thing is you write the return type of the function. So what is a return type? Return type is basically what data it is going to give out after performing the job. So in case it's not giving anything, you have a data type for that also, right? So remember from the data type video, it is void. So if you don't have anything to return, you are just going to mention it as void. And if you have anything to return, you are going to put it as int. So here now, if you have a question why this particular main function is int, if you execute this code, you will be getting some code over there, right? So if you remember, let me just quickly execute this code. If I build and run this, so let's say 12, 12, and then 24. Okay, I'm executing this for 12 times, 10 times. Let me just remove this particular loop, and then this one also. 12. So here if you see it returned with some code, right? That is 0. So that is from this particular main function. So that is why you were first writing return 0. Remember when the code block gave you the template code, it had this return 0 over here. So in case some anomaly happens while execution, it will give different return codes, that is -1 or something like that. So those codes mean that your program did not end correctly. If it successfully reached return 0, it means that your code ran successfully, and then 0 means no errors. So that is why we use this return 0. So even if you omit it from this particular main function, it does not matter, because main is designed to return 0 when it's successfully executed. For our functions, we need to definitely return something if we put some other variable type, I mean the return type except void. So if you write something like int, let's say add or float add or whatever it is, if you write some other data type over here, you need to return a data of that particular type to the function which is calling it, right? So that we'll be looking later. So first we'll understand how to work with functions which takes 0 inputs and then 0 outputs. So let me write it over here. It takes 0 inputs and then 0 inputs and 0 outputs, right? So output, I mean the returns. So it is going to give some output. I'm just going to put everything inside the function. So it is going to give you some output. Output is something on the screen. Return is something where you get back something, right? So like y equal to f of x, you are going to get some value of y, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm just calling f of x. I'm not giving any y to that. So I won't get any value back, but I will get the job done over here. So here for 0 inputs, I need to put void because I'm not going to, sorry, for 0 returns, I need to put void because I'm not going to give out anything to the function. And then for inputs, I'm just going to leave it blank, right? So you need to put the parenthesis. This parenthesis is exactly the same thing as your mathematical parenthesis. Inside that goes all the arguments you are going to pass in through, arguments or the inputs you are going to pass through the particular function for which you need a particular output, right? So I'm not going to pass in any input for now. And then the way you define function is you put this block, right? So notice that I'm writing the function outside this main function because this is a separate function and this becomes another function. So if you can write inside this particular main function also, but that is a bit clumsier and it has its own problems. So we'll be talking about that at a later stage. So for now, we are going to write all our functions outside the main function, right? So you need to give a meaningful name to the function, right? So I forgot to mention about this. This is the function name. So you need to give some name which says what the function is doing. You can't just give something like, let's say XYZ. So something like that. So you yourself won't understand what you're going to do with that particular function. So you need to give some value name so that you understand what that function is doing and it has some meaning related to what it's actually doing, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just cut everything from here and then put it inside this, right? So what it means is if I call add, all this function, all these statements are going to get executed, right? So how do we call that function? We don't have any output, right? So I can't call something like y equal to add, right? Because I'm not giving any return types. I'm just putting it as void. Void means once the job is done, it will come back over here without returning anything. Returning is it's just going to give you some value, right? So it's not going to do that. It is just going to continue with the flow. So I'm not going to mention anything over here, but just call add and then put a semicolon over here. So notice this is called the definition of the function. So that is let me write it over here. Function definition. And this one is called the function call, right? Let us look at the execution. It's going to do the same exact thing. It is going to ask for two numbers and then it's going to return me the output. So now if you look at the main function, it's much more readable, right? You understand that you are actually adding two numbers. So if you just look at this particular code, it will be easier for you to understand as well as debug. Let's say you were writing a very big program where a particular part had a mistake, and then instead of tracing the whole program, you could actually trace the only this particular part of the program, right? Suppose let's say I did not write the logic properly. I put minus over here. And once I execute, I will get to know that instead of adding, it is actually subtracting. So I'll come back over here. I'll just change this particular thing and then the job is done. It is error free, right? So that is why we use functions, and this particular approach is actually called procedural programming. So what we are doing is we are dividing our particular problem into procedures. So procedures are nothing but functions, and then we are actually solving everything on its own, and then we are actually combining everything and then giving out the result. So that is what procedural programming is, and that is how we use functions in C++. So now if I just remove this particular thing and then put it over here, right, after the main function, now what will happen is if I try to execute it, you will be seeing that I have an error. So what is that? It says add was not declared in the scope. What it means is that this particular add, it doesn't know that there is something called add in the particular program, because add is defined by us, right? It is not a property of the compiler. It doesn't know what add is. We actually mentioned that we are going to use something called add, and add means you need to do all these things, right? So to actually tell something like that, you can either define the functions before the main, so that is as I executed right now. Another thing is that you have something called the prototype of a function. So what a prototype is you put the return type of the function and then the function name, and then inside a pair of parentheses the parameters list, whatever you're going to use as the parameters for the particular function, and then you put a semicolon. So it's just like copying this particular thing and then pasting it over here. So one thing is that if of parameters, you don't have to write the variable names too, but since I've not discussed about the parameters, I will be discussing about them in the next video. So at that time, we will be seeing that in the prototype of a function, we don't have to actually put in the variable names too. We just have to put in the data type. So for now, we are not going to have any inputs, right? So we're just going to put this over here and then put a semicolon over here. So what this does is, it is called the prototype, and it will tell the compiler that, hey, I have a function called add. So whenever you have an add over here, you need to refer to this particular add function. So whenever I have something called add over here, I need to refer back to this particular function, which is actually the body of the add function, the definition of the add function. So whenever add is called, you need to execute all the statements line by line. If I now execute it, I'll be getting an error-free program. So I can write something and then I'll be getting the output. So from the next video, we will be understanding how to work with different types of functions. That is multiple inputs and zero returns, or let's say one return and zero inputs, and one return and then multiple inputs. So all these things we'll be looking in the subsequent videos.